So we'll call the meeting to order at 6:36 p.m. For those that haven't, just do me a favor and please print your name as legibly as possible on this before you leave, just so we have a record of who is here for the minutes. The first order of business is to review and make any changes to the agenda. Board members, any changes to the agenda?
No.
Hearing none, move on to the second item, and this is the approval of the minutes. There was a typo in the warning. Instead of 12/5, it should be December 19th are the minutes that need approving, but it was just pointed out to me that those minutes never made it up onto the website for some reason. I have a copy of them here as emailed to the webmaster, but I guess they never made it up and we didn't catch that until right now. So if there's no objection, we'll table that to the next meeting. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right, great. So then that brings us to the third item on the agenda, which is the bulk of the conversation tonight. That's on the draft short-term rental ordinance that the Planning Commission has been working on. The Planning Commission has had, I think, at least 2 meetings with the board just to talk about kind of the ordinance and some questions and going back and forth on changes or rewrites or edits. And now what the board is hoping to do is to have a public hearing to try to do a little bit more outreach to get people involved, aware of it, get feedback on it, and then the board will decide, you know, what action to take on that, whether it's pass it, don't pass it, kick it back for more work, whatever the board decides to do. But tonight is our chance to get some more public input on it, which is why I think everybody's here. So with that, what I want to do is turn it over to the Planning Commission to give just kind of a brief introduction about, you know, what the ordinance is, where it came from, what's in it, and then anything that they want to highlight before we open it up to just general discussion. So with that, we'll recognize any members of the Planning Commission that want to take the floor.
We're all looking at each other.
Okay, my name is Alyssa Hardy. I'm on the Planning Commission. And how the ordinance kind of came about was we had some...
Can I just pause you for 1 second? Can those online hear okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
And we had some concerned community members come to some of our meetings, voice their concerns with short-term rentals, and then the Development Review Board reached out to us asking for clarity with short-term rentals and their process with conditional use. And we went to regional planning and they attended quite a few of our meetings and we asked for advice, and they said their recommendations was to tackle it as an ordinance first, and then when we revise the bylaws, we could alter the bylaws, but first do an ordinance. So that's why we're at an ordinance instead of bylaws right now. And I think that's kind of the history of it. Has everybody had a chance to read the draft, or is like...
I hope so. We don't need to do a step-by-step walkthrough. And
Okay.
we're not, yeah, I mean, if folks haven't read it yet, then that's on them. But I just didn't know if there was anything specifically in there that you wanted to point out. You don't have to. I just wanted to give the Planning Commission the floor for a minute or two, just to kind of...
I think one thing to point out, that the ordinance that we're proposing, or the select board is proposing, the draft ordinance, that it reflects, as far as the different districts, what the bylaws are already requiring of where it's permitted and where it's prohibited. It's just a reflection of the bylaws, and as the bylaws change, the ordinance would change to follow what the bylaws are, so it's not changing where they're allowed or where they're not allowed. It's reflecting what's already in place for that.
Okay.
By bylaws, you mean zoning bylaws.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In case, ordinance is ordinance, bylaws is zoning, so.
And just, you mentioned that you had talked to the DRB initially around some of this stuff, and this is kind of a little bit of where that came from. Could you guys just talk a little bit about what the issues the DRB was having, and then what the ordinance would, how the ordinance would assist there or be corrective or?
Do you want the, like, is it Parma and Sue, is it easier for the DRB to maybe elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah, so we do have some members of the DRB here. Parma, as chair of the DRB, do you want to, would you be willing to just give some background to the initial conversation from the DRB to the Planning Commission around what the issues that were arising were and what the ordinance might tackle that zoning presently doesn't?
On to me?
Yeah, sorry, Parma, did you hear me?
Well, the zoning doesn't really address short-term rentals. And we were looking for some guidance. And this has been quite a while. And I did go before the Planning Commission and gave them a list of things that we were concerned about as a DRB. And right now it has evolved to where when we have a hearing, we have certain things that we are conditions to have a short-term rental. It includes the number of people, the parking, rules, quiet time. Also, we are requiring, the conditional use is requiring that they have rental insurance, not regular house insurance, but rental insurance. We've been requiring them to have a state tax use, meals and rooms certificate. What else, Sue?
911 address
Yeah,
visible
911.
inside the property in case of an emergency.
So this all came about because there's nothing in our zoning that actually tells us what we should be doing. So every meeting we have, we come up with something, we add to it. Like we had one meeting and Barry was an alternate. He came up with that we should be posting the 911 address in the house where they notice in case there's an emergency, a fire, and they say, they're out of towners, we don't know our address. So that's how it came about. And we did give a list. The board got together and we gave a list as to what we felt should be required.
Okay, is there a formal list that the DRB has now of kind of like the short-term rental conditional use review punch list?
Yeah.
It sounds like that's kind of evolved, but if that's something you could email the board, that'd be great, because I don't think we were aware that you guys had a formal kind of list of things that you walk through for these.
Well, if you look, it should, when the decision is posted on the website, and that is it'll list what we want them to do. Okay?
Yeah, I didn't know if there was like a rubric that the DRB was using, essentially whereby an applicant comes in and you walk through. I mean, I could see the decision would kind of be the outcome of using a rubric like that. I just didn't know if there was a standard kind of rubric or matrix or list of questions that the DRB walked through. It sounded like that's something that might have evolved, but.
Well,
We don't have an actual written list, but we've done it so often that we know what we want in there, but we could certainly do that for you. Give you a list of everything that we have been requiring on the conditional use.
And it has evolved over time.
Right.
There are more conditions in the recent hearings than there was in the original ones. So each hearing that the applicant has to go by those conditions, even though we might have missed some in the beginning, so.
Okay. And kind of putting side by side the conditional use review process and the conditions that the DRB is using, and then looking at the ordinance that the Planning Commission's drafted, are there any direct things in the ordinance that are not being or cannot be addressed through the conditional use process?
Sue,
They can be, but Charlie, I guess that's our question. If you're going to pass this ordinance, what's going to happen now when somebody comes to us for a conditional use? Why would they, when you've got an ordinance? Why would they need a conditional use permit?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that other than the zoning bylaws would require one. But that's a totally fair point, Sue.
And if that were just hypothetically, if anyone who has already gotten a conditional use permit and has it, and it runs the length of time they own the house, are they going to be grandfathered and not have to do this ordinance, this $100 a year ordinance and all that? They've already paid $100 to get their conditional use.
Yep, no, those are good questions, and we'll open it up to questions in a minute. I was
Okay.
just curious if there was anything specifically that was in the ordinance that can't be addressed through the conditional use process, because that sounded like
No,
the beginning
yeah,
something
that's-
that was concerned, but
That, no.
I have
it-
one
it's
thing.
covered. Yep,
I have on it, the capacity of people per rental. It does say in number 4 that the number of bedroom, so you'd either have to have a wastewater or state water supply permit of, obviously, because if you're gonna have, 10 people in your house and it's only permitted for, 2 bedrooms. But on there, it also says, where no permits are required, the number of bedrooms is shown on the lister's card. And if you look at the lister's card on the first page, number of bedrooms only reflects bedrooms that are on above grade. So for a perfect example, a house just sold that had one-story house with 1 bedroom above grade, but there was 3 bedrooms below grade. That owner wanted us to change that to reflect the 4 bedrooms, but this is the way we appraise properties, so we couldn't change that. And Parma can confirm that as a fee appraiser also. So the lister's card, there might be a note on the last page that says finished basement with 3 bedrooms, but on the lister's card, under number of bedrooms, it would only show, in this case, it would show 1 bedroom. So that would be something that you might want to be a little more specific about. That's just my input.
okay, so just to confirm, just to clarify that, when someone comes before the DRB is going to use the information on the lister's card to establish maximum occupancy?
Well,
no,
we haven't
we
been doing
don't.
that.
no, we just go by the applicants giving us the information. We don't look and see if they have wastewater permits or.
So if the application says there's 4 bedrooms, then you would say the max occupancy is 8, 10. So it's 2 plus 2 per bedroom plus 1, 2. I can't do math this late at night.
It's times 2 plus 2.
Times 2 plus 2. Okay. Okay. Let me just, anything else from the DRB before we bring it back to the room?
Not for me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So back to the planning commission, anything that you want to respond to there? or-
Yeah, give us some background that leads to where I'm going. When the DRB first came to us, they said, we have no criteria on which to base conditions. And one criteria on the generic criteria that are listed with all conditional use is character of the neighborhood, and I think another might be safety. And somebody from regional planning came to one of our meetings and advised us that we could use, as criteria, we could use fire code and health department rules. And that's where bedrooms, allowing for how many per bedroom and et cetera came about. And the fire department rules, I don't think they would allow a commercial use, and STRs are a commercial use. I don't think they would allow bedrooms that are below grade, because one of the requirements is that in addition to the main exit, they be able to exit through windows. And if you're below grade, I don't think you can do that. If you're partly below grade, but there's a window that's of adequate size above, that might be a situation that's kind of in between, where they should be allowed to do it. And
Okay.
also
The things I
the,
referred to definitely had an exit in the basement.
Okay. Okay.
that's the one.
Okay, thank you. So we've got background, okay, any last comments from the planning commission, and then I want to open it up to discussion. So 1 second, Tosca. Joe, anything
Yeah.
quick?
I would like to talk briefly, and for everybody here to look at, we have a graph that was drawn up by an entity that calls itself the world's most trusted researcher for short-term rentals. And
It's Air DNA, right?
yes, it's Airbnb, yeah, Airbnb. And this is a graph of it, and it shows why, this is kind of indicative of why we've kind of responded. These years go from, start with 2018, when there were 60 units in town, to March of last year, where there were 108, from this person's data. The short-term rental group that a number of people here in town are involved in use the number of 61. I guess it's because you said that's for like an entire house. It might just be one of those 61s. And so this is really what pushed us to really respond and go to bat on this thing, because we don't know how high it's going up. And it's also one of the other realities right now is the changes in Vermont that are making living costs so high. Getting involved in houses, and needless to say, this kind of use of housing is one opportunity. It's economically advantage to homeowners. It also has some negatives about if you're going to keep a school, how are you going to have young people settle in your town? What's the incentives for them to get here? So anyway, this graph is somewhat telling to justify why we went ahead and we've brought this to the select board, and thank you all for coming. You know, it's a complex issue. It's a kind of moving issue. You can have different values about it, either or, but it's great to see this many people talking about it, because it ain't going away, and we aren't going away either. And you know, people live here for a long time. We're here because the place is beautiful and we like it, or we love it. And there's a lot of forces for change now. A lot of us, I lived here for a long time. I loved it when we didn't have to worry about change, but that ain't the way it is anymore. So thanks.
Thanks. Does the planning commission have, that's a question I had, do you guys have a subscription to Air DNA?
No.
No? Okay.
But Joe's point underlines another point, is that you're getting different figures on the trend of short-term rentals. The Industry Alliance will say that it's at around 61, and this Air DNA is up a little over 100. Regional is a third number.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is,
Higher.
through registration, try to get some kind of a more accurate local number for what it is.
Might be, I've never used the platform, but it might be interesting. I mean, if it's not that expensive, we can get the planning commission a account to do some more data mining.
It's free to log in, just to like see the basic information, but then to dive in, it's a paid.
Well, that's what I'm saying, because it sounds like what's needed is to dive in to actually tease apart what it is you're looking at. Because I know that like there's lodging establishments that are inns or bed and breakfasts in town that list their places on Airbnb, and so, you know, is each one of those another unit? Is the whole thing a unit? How are we adding? So there's some clarity on numbers, and I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but just if we can give the planning commission whatever tools to understand it a little bit better, then I think we're happy to do that.
Okay.
So let's open it up to just conversation now. So Tosca, I saw your hand up first, so go ahead.
Yeah, I am always concerned as somebody that served on this board for many years of duplicating things. Duplication on ordinances creates confusion. The state just passed the law, the S-79, that regulates Airbnbs. The governor vetoed it, but they overrode his veto, and what I'm just reading is they have a short-term rental health and safety checklist that I'm looking at right now that includes the fire inspection, which is extremely extensive. They're paying, so Airbnb pays the meals and rooms tax when you book through them. They pay the town directly. They have the health and safety. They have a number of the conditions that are in the ordinance. It's already a state law. So instead of passing another law that duplicates the state law, I'm a fan of going the zoning way and doing the specific conditions. Why do the work twice, is what I'm saying. And the specific conditions with conditional uses, you put it all in there, and that's where you streamline your things that are not covered in the state law. The state law also requires insurance that is not homeowners, so that's been passed.
When was it passed?
In June 24, I mean, it's.
Okay,
It was, so to be current on, I mean, I thought it says it was vetoed and then they overrode Scott's veto. It was the last two things they did.
Yeah.
So I could be wrong, but.
Because I think that's the same form they've had, I think, since 2018 or 16.
Right.
the
They-
Safety checklist.
What they've been fighting to pass the legislation and it finally went through. So before we make a law that is already a state law, let's just double check, but I'm reading it current. I just read 2 articles from 7 days that say they passed this thing. And it provides a state registry. And we have our extra 1% tax. I'm also not a fan of charging people $100 if we can't prove what we're gonna use that for, and why can't we use that 1%? You'll be able to track where that comes from. So Phineas Swan's 1% is gonna show up. You're gonna see who contributes to that 1% local tax. I'm sure the tax department can break it out and use that money for any, okay, so we have one person on the planning or a DRB that
Well, the
gets. or-
1% goes towards the wastewater. That's like the local option tax was.
Was that specific in there for that? But at least you'll be able to see where it's coming from and whose Airbnbs are contributing to it. And maybe, you know, because there's an offset, I don't know, but
So I'm not, so just to clarify, I just pulled up the legislature's page.
I'm just,
I don't think they overrode
They
his
did not.
veto.
The clock ran out. They did not override the veto.
That was my understanding.
S-79 is not
Didn't
enforced.
pass.
I think they are bringing back a bill related to this session. They're also bringing back a housing bill, which is gonna have some implications here that might be
and
interesting.
I may be back, but I'd like to
I'm
maybe.
going to look into it more. The last I knew, last year when it ended, I thought it ended up not passing, is what I thought.
Okay.
Well,
That is correct.
I will find the article before I leave and show it to you that I read that
Okay.
said it passed. But even so, the state is bringing this back up.
Yeah.
So I'm still opposed to making an ordinance that could very well be overridden by a state law pretty quickly, because they're all gonna be on it again. It's a serious issue. It's the duplication.
Okay,
Go to zoning, let's get it right in
I'm
there.
not sure that the state,
thanks,
any accommodation for compliance.
okay, thanks, Tosca.
Well,
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
the bill involved hiring inspectors for the very reason that small towns can't afford to
Yes.
hire people to go in.
And be in control of all of this.
So
Okay, thanks,
that's
Tosca.
just what I was.
Others, Sarita, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Charlie. The AirDNA data, I just wanted to comment, is because of Airbnb. And when it became famous and you had a platform and an iCloud situation. Rentals have been going on here since the 1960s. When there was no Airbnb data, mainly second homeowners, they come down. I have a neighbor, for example. She rents out her 3-bedroom place Christmas week, Martin Luther King, and President's Week. Times that are very busy and we need the extra people and the extra beds here. She's point blank said, if this is instituted, tell her that she's not going to be bothered with all of the fuss, she's just not renting it. And I think we really have to dive deep into how many of these rentals are second home owners who would never ever rent to begin with. And they are also equally not here on the conversation because they can't vote, they're second home owners. Those same second home owners come here and end up putting kids in school. They visit here, they stay here. COVID has completely changed everything. I mean, people come and see how wonderful it is and they move here. So it is helping to bring new people to the area, new young people, and grow, because we have an aging population. We need these people to come in, and they're not going to stay in hotels, they're not going to stay in B&Bs. They want a house, they want to see what it's like first. It's a really, really important need. On the question of safety, everybody who has any intelligence would have renter's insurance on their things. And I can tell you point blank, they do the work for what this ordinance would be doing, because They send in an inspector to inspect for their insurance, and I can attest to this personally. I had an inspection of a property, and it all went very well, except I had a tree overhanging too close to the roof that they said was dangerous. So they sent a note and what was wrong, and I had to do the tree. One thing and another came up. I never got the tree taken down. And they sent a second notice saying, show proof of your receipt and that somebody qualified took down the tree. And again, I waited a little bit. Next thing I know, my insurance was cancelled. So within 2 days, I got the tree cut down and I sent the receipts and a picture of the building. That was all done by the insurance. That had nothing to do with any inspector telling me that it was an unsafe thing, that the tree was going to fall down on the house. You also keep talking about a $100 fee. That ordinance is talking about $250 for a single family residence. Most of the rentals in the short-term market are single family residences, whether an apartment, a house. Far fewer are renting a room that would qualify for the $100 thing. So that's it, sorry.
On the fee, can I ask a question of the planning commission? Because that was a question that was flagged that I don't remember getting clarity on. At least I don't have it in my notes. But there's a provision in here that says that a permit fee is required for each STR unit. But then it talks about each room potentially being a unit. So if it was a house such as one on Main Street that I'm aware of, where they've got like 2 apartments and 4 bedrooms, would that be 6 units, or would that just be one?
It depends how it gets rented out. Like if you're renting out a bedroom to an individual person, and that's like one rental, so that would be a partial listing. But if you're renting multiple rooms to the same family or like the same booking, then it's how it's listed on.
And if a property could be used in either way, would the fee go to like the highest multiplier? Because you couldn't assess the fee based on the listings that haven't happened yet, right? So if you could have like.
If it was 3 stories and 3 apartments, would it be $100 for each apartment, being $300 for the whole house?
Well, you can just look online, right?
For the whole house?
Yes.
If they have each one individually listed on Airbnb, you can say you've got 6 listings.
So it would be max. Okay.
What if you had those same 3 floors and you rented it to all one group of people?
Yeah, exactly.
So then is it now
It's
This is
huge for
annual fee, right?
Okay, so let's
Because you
start.
can't determine.
But it would still be listed, like you would list it as 3 individual listings, so they would be, if they rented the whole thing.
Okay, so it sounds like the intent of the planning commission was based off of how it's listed, which answers the question. Thanks. Barry, did you?
The definition of short-term rental is dwelling room or self-contained dwelling unit rented to the transient traveling public, etc. So it's basically, it's a dwelling unit, which would be bathroom facilities, kitchen facilities, and sleeping facility. So if you have a house with 3 different bedrooms that and 1 kitchen, etc., that you rent out to 3 different people, that's still 1 unit, right? If you have a 3-story house building that has 3 apartments, each apartment is a dwelling unit.
Okay.
A lot of listings share.
Yeah, what about a hotel or a bed?
Okay, let's do.
They're included under inns by the state, not included.
Well, and then what do you do with a place where it's just a bedroom and there is no kitchen? Is that still
That would be a
unit?
partial unit.
That's a partial rental.
Okay, so we okay. All right, other questions or comment? Yeah, Peter?
Just in response to Sarita's point that people that rent tend to come and stay, that's not been our experience. 1 in 3 of what my wife has sold has been an unseen, purely for investment to rent.
Okay.
So then it's consuming that housing unit from someone who might otherwise make the purchase, who grew up here, for example. It's off the market. And
Okay.
it's just to turn a dollar, which is, not a problem, other than when it comes at the expense of the community.
Okay, well, it does sound like there is some questions around numbers here that would have to get figured
The
out, because we've
other
got
response
anecdotal.
To Sarita's point of like the person who rents occasionally, we tried to take that in consideration with if you rented less than 14 days of a calendar year, then you're exempt from this, so that would cover somebody that just rented Christmas week and a couple weeks, like high weekends.
Okay. Hold on one second. Sorry, saw Merle's hand go up. So.
There's two suggestions for paragraph 4. The first line were short-term rental. To be consistent, that could use an acronym STR, I think. And the very last line where it says bedroom shown on the lister's card, I think you want the itemized property cost sheet there. Lister's card is really nothing per se. The itemized property cost sheet has everything, a complete description of the property. Not only the property itself, the building, sale data, when it was built, bedroom, bathrooms, everything about the building is on that itemized property cost sheet.
Okay, thanks, Merle. Yeah, go ahead.
I personally, my name's Christopher Johnson. I literally have been coming up here for 15 years, staying at a local Airbnb. I just recently bought a place up here. The intent was long-term rental. With that being said, every cost around, I can't afford to go that route. So I have to do at least some of my property as a short-term rental to recoup some of the costs so that I can then return it back to long-term rental. Like diesel fuel, $6 a gallon, home heat oil, like the cost is insane. And it's not just for me, it's for every business in town and every family in town. So I'm not the only one who is trying to move up here to simplify life and to enjoy the environment.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna go quickly to the screen first, and then we'll come right back. Gabby, I see your hands up. If you wanna hop on, go for it.
Sure, I just have a question about, I guess I'm a little bit confused, and maybe this goes to Sue's point about we're sort of double doing, I guess if the ordinance represents the current bylaws, then are we trying to solve the problem of permanent housing in town? And if so, would this do that?
No.
All it does is define the issue a little bit better.
So I'll pass it to the planning commission. So I don't know, Peter, if you wanted to respond, or planning commission members.
Yeah, the whole foundation of this ordinance is registration, so that we have a better feel for exactly what amount of available housing is being used for investment versus long-term rental or purchase by local residents. And we don't have, no one seems to have a very firm number on that. So that's one of the thrusts of the ordinance, is to get better definition, number one. Number two, to support compliance of the safety issues, because they're there in place, but not everybody's registered with online platforms. So they're free to the wind. There are short-term rentals in zoning districts that bylaws don't currently prohibit or allow short-term rentals. And that, I suppose, is subject to change, but at the present time, those are illegal rentals. It's just those are the bylaws that are in place now. So the ordinance is an attempt to clarify the issue that's not very clear right now. I don't know if that answers your question in whole or in part.
Folks online, were you able to hear Peter's response? Okay, thanks. Bill, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah,
go up.
thanks.
Yeah.
I'm Bill. We actually live in Westfield, about 20 feet from the Montgomery line, but we tried to buy with Lynn actually in Montgomery, and would like to own property here in the future. We also own the Woodshed Lodge in Jay, so we advertise on Airbnb as a traditional bed and breakfast. And we come from a place that was having very similar issues with short-term rentals, where the long-term market had been decimated. And we participated in that. We rented part of our house in a very expensive town as an Airbnb. And I can say from experience that I think it's important to define the goals. And if the goal is to protect the long-term market, I don't think it does that. And it certainly, I think, sort of hinders the locals that are making money off of Airbnb. It's going to impact them more proportionately with the fees and some of these extra guidelines, because people, perhaps like ourselves or someone from New York buying their third, fourth investment property up here, $100 or $250 fee is barely a speeding ticket in the grand scheme of a cash positive rental property. So you're not going to stop them, but you may end up losing some of the local owned houses like Sarita's friend that just says, you know what, the hell with it, I don't want to go through all these hoops. And then you end up actually in a worse case where you've got more properties proportionally owned by out-of-staters that have no ties with the community. So I think that it's important to frame the conversation as what part of this ordinance is common sense, most of which I agree with, all the stuff, the local management, safety, septic, that's just basic, tracking, I think that makes all the sense in the world. But don't move the goalposts too far on the locals at the expense of encouraging more of these properties to be owned by people from out of state. Even if they're not institutional investors, someone that is, you know, collecting homes with no intent of living there.
Okay.
It's just easier for them to jump those hoops.
Thanks, Bill. Let's go back to the Zoom. Sue, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I guess I was responding kind of to what Gabby had said. And if people aren't complying now with the conditional use permit, like they're not coming to us and applying for a conditional use, they're not with Airbnb, they're just renting out their properties. Maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse. How is this ordinance going to track this? I mean, if we can't do it through the conditional use permit route, how are we going to track this? I don't understand.
So I'm going to give the planning commission a chance to respond to that. So Barry, go ahead.
Okay, the zoning administrator is the only enforcement we have for zoning. And putting that additional burden on her would about quadruple at least the amount of hours she would have to spend. The ordinance, the fee in the ordinance is to cover the cost of administration, which would initially mean essentially figuring out who, you know, telling people to register, and after a short period of time, trying to figure out who is not registered by doing that deep dive, etc., and enforcing it by a separate enforcement officer.
Yeah, I got all that. I understood all that, but I'm just saying, how are you going to find all these people?
By looking through the ads. Is one way, I mean,
Okay. Anything else, Sue?
No, that's it.
Okay. Oh, Linda, sorry. Did you want to respond to that question?
Well, as a lister, every year, we would go through the Airbnb sites to see who is actually renting. And it should be reflected in the homestead declarations, and often it is not. So that's another thing that could be tracked through this. I mean, the listers are not the homestead declaration police, but I've seen that often where people that I realize are renting and might claim it as their homestead or don't claim any rental percentage in their declaration. So that's just something that I've noticed.
So Linda, do you know, as far as the homestead declaration goes, if you, cause I don't know this, if you are a homeowner that rents your property, say like in the ordinance, say it's only 2 weeks a year, does that mean that you cannot claim? Is there a limit of when you?
Proportionally.
You can claim a homestead declaration. You would just have to put a percentage of rental, which in that case, if it was only 2 weeks a year, it's pretty minimal, but you're also supposed to be claiming that income, not on the homestead declaration, but on your taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's hard to really track who is actually doing that. And some people rent that aren't on Airbnb sites.
Right.
Okay.
They might not have the proper insurance or, fire inspections, things like that. That's
Okay,
just,
thanks, Linda. We'll stick with Zoom and we'll go to Linda.
Hi, thank you. I just was wondering, how would somebody know if they were registering and they say, why would somebody register if they don't know how many days they're going to be renting this for? If they're just trying it out and the minimum is 14 days, what would make anybody say, okay, I know I'm going to be renting this out for more than 14 days?
I have the answer to that. If the way it's written in the homes is for a homestead, if that is available for rent, it doesn't have to be actually rented, but if it's available for rent for the whole year, then you have to claim that percentage of your dwelling for the entire year. So even if no one's in it, if it's available to be rented, then it should be included as a rental space.
Okay, I think to Linda's question though, I think that had to do with more if somebody isn't sure how long they want to rent it for. Is that kind of they're a new renter, and what would the trigger be?
Well, I'm thinking, I'm thinking about it as comparing it to people that start a catering business in Vermont. For the first year, they have a certain dollar amount that if it's under that dollar amount, I think it's 20,000, then they don't really have to start the official process for getting the meals and rooms and the catering license or whatever. So I was wondering what there might be for new people that were just kind of trying this out and trying it on for size.
Okay, yes, the planning commission can chime in, catering stuff aside, Tosca.
That's
my comparison.
Income in the state of Vermont, you need to have a license.
But I think the trigger would be that once you rent it for more than 2 weeks, then you would be forced to register essentially, is that the right? Okay, so it would be, once you pass 2 weeks of renting it, then you would be essentially forced to register.
I think it could play into what Linda was saying. If somebody's calendar is blocked an entire year besides 2 weeks, then you would see that there was 2 weeks of potential rent. But if it was a wide open calendar and they had bookings booked out in advance more than 14 nights, then it would be time for them to register.
Okay. Well, I want to give anybody a chance who hasn't spoken yet to speak. Yeah, Walt, go ahead.
So, Walter Knight, own multiple properties in Montgomery. So the only advice I'd have for the ordinance and the board at this time is when you get involved with absolutes, such as involving the state fire codes and whatever, make sure you understand in totality what you're signing up for once you get them involved. In construction, rentals, housing, etc., there's grandfather clauses dealing with exits, egresses, etc. There's some that aren't applicable, there's some that are applicable, it all depends. You can very quickly make a lot of problems for a lot of people with older homes if you try to apply a standard at a new level that doesn't allow for a grandfather clause and or exceptions to be made for existing structure. Egress size, window size, what is an egress, what isn't an egress, all these sorts of things will directly affect a large percentage. I'm not going to say what percentage, because I don't know all the houses, but I guarantee it's a large percentage of anyone interested in Airbnb. I just ask you to be aware of that whenever you get a state regulation involved.
In a second. Okay.
That's very true, everything you said.
It's hard to enforce.
So, I just want to just quickly, anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk yet, Dan, yep.
Yeah, my name's Daniel Ken. My wife and I own Crofters Green up the road. We're a licensed lodging facility. So I think we occupy a unique space in so much that we have the lodging license like an inn or Airbnb would, minus the breakfast part. But about 90% of our business comes from Airbnb. My question is along the same vein as Tosca's, is sort of where my mind goes, unless there's a pressing and demonstrable need currently, if the state's working on a lot of these efforts right now, I'm not a huge fan of the duplication of effort. I think, you know, the current ordinance makes a lot of sense for a lot of things. The number one issue in my mind is that registry. We don't know what's going on. However, I also don't know if that's the purview of the town to figure out right now at our cost. Given the amount of administrative tasks and duties, who's going to carry this out, the enforcement piece of that, I don't know who in the town would be able to do so. And if there is in fact something coming from the state to speak to this, maybe a wait and see might be prudent to figure out what direction the tide's going there. I think with regards to Airbnb, I know I wouldn't be back here if it wasn't for Airbnb. Again, it's my livelihood. I brought my wife back and we started a family. So like, I think we're an example of this sort of this next generation that's trying to move to the area. Some numbers I just looked up, it looks like about 40% of Vermont's tourism dollars comes from second homeowners. We're a town in Montgomery Center, 800 people, Jay has 550. So we're 30% larger, yet we have 5 restaurants to their 1. I don't think it's that we eat that much more than them, right? So we have a strong tourist base here. And I think it's important to kind of protect that. So I'm a fan of Airbnb. I think that people should follow the state regulations, keep things extra safe. I mean, that's just that's a no-brainer for me. But I worry that if we get into too much regulation or too many too many ordinances, I feel like that could just complicate things down the road unnecessarily.
Thanks, Dan. I think I saw Jimbo's hand. Were you trying to raise your hand, Jimbo?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, go for it.
All right. I just have a couple questions. One of which is, wait, so I'm already meant to have registered with the town somehow? I think, so I'm breaking a law?
So right now in our zoning, a lodging establishment is a conditional use in specific districts and it's prohibited in others. And so if you're in a district with a short-term rental where it's a conditional use, you need to come to the DRB and get a conditional use permit. It'd be the same kind of thing if you wanted to open up a pet store on Main Street, you'd have to get a conditional use permit.
Yeah. I just wanted to know, like, I thought I had sort of done all the right things. I'm glad that's something I learned I should be doing.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point, that it's on the books, but we might not have done a good job telling everybody about it. But
well, I'm best at following along too. It could be on me. I heard there was a talk about 911 addresses being recorded, and I've actually struggled to get my 911 address. So is that in the list of where you know all the houses? Can someone nod their head or shake their head that you guys don't have 911 addresses?
Yeah, Jimbo, we're aware. I mean, we've talked about this before, and I don't know the answer to the conundrum. I know that you have had an issue with that, and there are others in town that have had an issue with that. So that would have to be straightened out.
Yeah, well, if they already have the information, that would be great. I feel like I have done a good job in like doing my due diligence to try to make that house as safe as possible. And it speaks a little bit to stuff's grandfathered in, and like there's rope ladders and there's like every bedroom has 2 egresses. And I actually felt good when Doug went in and was like, you've done a good job. That being said, I have a feeling if the state came up, they might not say the same thing. And it's a bummer that it's like, as our town grows, we're losing some of that small town, we all know one another and can help one another out thing. And I just like to echo that if we could keep the state out of it and work as a town successfully, I think it would be great. And if we can't do that as a town, I guess we have to bring in the big boys, but like, I don't know, I think a lot could get lost.
All right, thanks, Jimbo.
Yeah, thank you.
Others, anybody who hasn't had a chance to talk yet that wants to? Okay, then I'm gonna go to Gabby on Zoom, and then we'll hit some folks in the room that,
I just had a quick clarifying question because I thought I heard. So right now, the conditional use, I guess maybe this is just a personal question, but it seems like number 2 where it says, sorry, the definition of a short-term rental. Like when I applied for conditional use, I think Linda sent it back to me and said, no, you don't need to do that. But I feel like I do need to do that. Like I guess do the conditional uses really match up with what this ordinance says?
Not
Because I don't know. I guess I don't know because I went to get a permit and I was told I don't need one. But looking at this ordinance, it does look like I would need one. So I guess I'm just wondering, I'm not looking at the conditional use definition, but are they lined up? Because I thought I heard somebody say they were lined up.
so the thing, the nut of what we're talking about with conditional use permits is that in certain districts, lodging establishments are a conditional use, and the definition of a lodging establishment, as is currently in the zoning bylaws, is a building or buildings containing rooms which are rented for commercial purposes, such as sleeping units for transients, each sleeping unit consisting of at least a bedroom and use of a bathroom, period. Included are hotels, motels, tourist courts, cabins, motor lodges, bed and breakfast, and the like. And so that's the definition that they've been using. And so if you run an operation that would meet that definition, then you would need to get a conditional use permit. I will point out that when the bylaws were written, there was absolutely no discussion of short-term rentals. So just want to flag that some of the stuff we're working from was done at a point of time when that wasn't thinking about it. So
Well, I think you do need a conditional use permit.
Okay, well, you guys sent it back to me, so I'm not going to take on that, but I'm willing to pay the $100. But I'm just saying, I think there was something about it being a part of my home that was different, but it doesn't seem like that's in there. I don't know. There just may be some discomfort.
You would need a conditional use.
I gotta say, in the beginning, it was not clear as to what was the difference between a lodging establishment and and a short-term rental, because a lodging establishment said that it was to be rented, didn't say how long. So that's one of the reasons why we went to the planning commission to find out what the difference would be, because we weren't really requiring conditional use for properties where they were only renting out one room and the person was living there. And then that changed. So that's one of the reasons why it was confusing. And that's one of the reasons we want something a little more specific in the zoning regulations to go by when we're hearing when we're at our hearings.
okay, thanks, Linda. I want to go to Kimberly on the Zoom. Kimberly, yep, there you go, Kim.
Thank you. I think I've got a lot of the clarification for a number of the questions that I have just through the conversation. But there's a lot that's really unclear. And one of the things I was wondering about is, it did state in there the lack of available housing for locals in Montgomery. And I'm wondering what the correlation is. Is there a direct correlation between the lack of housing available in Montgomery and how this ordinance is going to have a positive effect on available housing?
I would kick that to the planning commission for any response.
Initially, clearly not. But if it turns out that the registration reveals that a lot of houses that previously had been either low-income rental or permanent residences are being converted, and we don't want that to happen anymore, we could change the zoning bylaw to eliminate the conversion to short-term rental of residences. In other words, what's here is grandfathered, but no more.
I agree with Barry. If you want to.
Okay.
Just to elaborate a little, I also hear term short-term rental really continuously expanding to the point where now it seems to include everything from someone who rents a room to someone who rents a cabin to actual lodging establishments and full-on bed and breakfasts. Are all of those different categories, because I understand this is a multi-layered issue, but are all of those establishments truly being snowballed into one category?
Well, depends on what you're looking at, I guess.
Can I?
Well, under the zoning bylaw definition, they are.
Yeah, a lot of the problem is that the zoning definitions are, written from the 70s, I think, and do not take any of this into consideration. We really need to go back and change the zoning regulations to clarify, that renting 1 or 2 rooms in a house on a short-term basis, where you're living there, is not really a commercial activity, perhaps, or that it takes a lot less regulation, to do it. We don't define bed and breakfast anywhere, and I happened to get into a conversation with an inspector for the state health department who told me that the state regards a bed and breakfast as a place that serves food of any kind, any meal with your rental, and it's a bed and breakfast.
So a bed and breakfast is defined in our zoning.
Definition in the
It
zoning
is?
Yeah, a
bylaws.
bed and breakfast is
Does it include food?
As is a lodging
Okay,
establishment.
my bad.
a single-family dwelling unit in which the resident owner or permanent occupant provides short-term lodging and meals to transient paying guests. Is what,
So if they don't serve meals, then they're not a bed and breakfast.
But they could still be a short-term rental.
And they could still market through Airbnb.
Yeah, we have to clarify that with the bylaws.
I think that's one reason why, like, obviously, when we revise the bylaws, we need to address short-term rentals. But in the meantime, an ordinance was the fact, like, revising the bylaws is a longer process. And the town plan is going to expire, so we're addressing the town plan first and then bylaws. So it will be a bit before anything that gets drafted in the bylaws come into effect. So that was the benefit of doing an ordinance first. And then it could address things until the bylaws catch up to what the town wants.
That was regional planning's direction, to address it through an ordinance.
And have it be a
and catch up with the
temporary.
zoning bylaw.
Well, maybe after tonight, we'll want to address the bylaw first.
I don't
Are
know.
we in that dire straits that we can't wait?
okay. I wanna, Kim, does that answer your question? Sorry, I don't wanna leave you hanging. Okay, thanks. Okay, anybody else who hasn't had a chance to talk yet that wants to?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my biggest picture, we own a ski lodge, a couple of long-term rentals, and my Airbnbs were never good for our ski lodge. It wasn't like I was happy that they were all like influxing in because we lost a lot of business, but we found ways to either accept what we got, move on, or get a new way to have business. And I encourage people to be entrepreneurs and like see this area as a beautiful area to come to make some money, pay their mortgage off, and maybe settle here someday. They'll see us, maybe they'll be part of our community in the future, but it's not all corporate investment coming in. And there's a lot of really good people trying hard in life to make a living. It's a livelihood, and they're gonna affect the people who are living here who have like not so much extra income to live on, as well as the people who are just trying to like get ahead of the game. It's not like we have a huge corporation taking over. If it was like thinking about from the planning commission, if what we have, and they do whatever they need to do with it. If you want to consider new houses or new things that are being built, restricting that, like considering what they build, because we don't need any more of that. That's one thing, but like what we have for housing and who decides to sell it, what they decide to do with it, all the like extra like clerical work and like stress on everybody to add extra laws and extra ordinances, and like you don't know the effect that it's going to have on people. A lot of them will soak it up and move away, or just soak it up and suffer. Like, it's negative to some people, and you're causing that harm. Like, deal with the new. like focus on what's happening in the future and how we develop. But I worry because our town is really full of a lot of really great people. And to try to channel what's coming, like what can happen with what we have now already. They've purchased land. They just did it and you're trying to change this. Like you're changing like their life plan. Like that's a major effect on people in a negative way, and you're not considering all of those effects on every level. So I worry because you can harm people. Like why can't we consider moving forward, like trying to focus on some more simple restrictions? Like why does it have to be so technical? We have like 800 people here. This is like, it seems like more of a city ordinance than a small town issue, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
thanks, Carrie. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
Carrie was kinda put it well, what I was kinda thinking about. And on another level, like we also need to compare or compete with the hotel at J and other towns around.
J-Town.
And if we have fee after fee that we're paying, we're gonna have to raise our rentals. And then people are just gonna go to other towns and they're not gonna come to our businesses. And we're already paying for the condition of use fee. And then now we're gonna pay another fee. We have 2 fees. Just, it sounds like mostly just so we can keep an eye on, hire someone else. But maybe we could, I don't know where we got those numbers from, how much income that's gonna make if we have 80 houses rented. But if we just raised a little bit, maybe the condition of use fee, to give just a little bit extra money to oversee this a little bit more and did more in the bylaws, as opposed to just doing a whole nother ordinance, a whole nother fee, a whole nother employee to watch over everything. It does really seem like a lot that we need to like juggle our town compared to other towns who are not doing that.
Okay, thanks, Brad. All right, anybody who hasn't spoken yet that wants to speak? Going once, going twice. All right, so it's 7:38, so I want to just pause for a second and kind of bring it back to the board members that are here to see if any board members have any questions that have come up from the discussion. And then if not, move it into reflections, and then any potential actions people are thinking about. Because we could stay here all night, but I don't think any of us want to. So any questions from the board?
No. I guess the one point that caught my attention was the note about if you have, say you have a rental, it's an old farmhouse, they've gone to the bylaws, they've done everything that they need to do for getting conditional use permit and everything, but say it isn't a house that wouldn't per se meet the state's safety regulations, where does that fit in this ordinance? As far as like, does that make sense?
So you're saying that if somebody has a dwelling that they want to make an STR and they won't pass a fire inspection because, for example, the window in a bedroom is too small?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Did you have a response to
I have
that?
an answer for that.
Okay.
Under the state law, they could not operate a short-term rental there. The problem is
they do.
Laws are irrelevant if you don't enforce them.
Yes.
And there's no enforcement under the state law. It's just a, hey, I promise you that I am in compliance.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that's
this-
why, you know, ordinances without enforcement are not ordinances.
Well, it sounds like state laws without enforcement aren't state law.
I guess that's kind of where Sarita falls into, if Sarita stating that the insurance companies would require.
Yeah.
But again,
You don't have
if you're talking about requiring insurance, but Sri is saying they already get insurance, I don't understand what the objection is to your requirement.
I don't think anybody here has an objection to the requirement. I guess the question is, and I still don't know the answer to this, when you're getting a conditional use permit from the DRB, is one of the conditions that you have an insurance certificate?
Yes.
Okay, so if there's a condition on your conditional use permit that already says that you need one, do we need to have an ordinance that also requires you to have one that is enforced by a separate body?
Yeah.
There's an
And then also, oh, go ahead.
The ordinance or the conditional use requires things like fire safety and insurance and all that.
That's true.
Is there any vehicle to enforce that if someone says, yes, I have it, yes, I have it?
Something happens.
Well,
they
it's
don't have it.
it's a state law, right? So, I'm just saying, it exists, so there's no state enforcement. So what this would do is it would either enforce
It would
through the
provide local
community,
enforcement.
or it would provide the attestation, right? Doesn't the ordinance actually say that all they have to do is just submit a piece of paper that says, I, under pains of perjury, say that I passed this?
Right,
Yeah.
which is what the state requires now. Before, but if they pass the law, then it's gonna be a different ball of wax. But right now, the state already says you have to have this fire and safety plan. Your insurance company's gonna say, we won't cover you if you're doing this activity.
The ordinance would say,
And so when-
we need to shut you down if you don't
So,
comply
so
with it.
Parma or Sue, during the conditional use process, is one of the conditions that they attest to the state's fire safety
Business police.
codes?
No.
And could that be?
Well,
Yes.
I could make a suggestion. A lot of the cities have their own fire inspector. They train one of their firemen, because to get a state inspection is like very time consuming. They're booked out. So I mean, if we haven't been requiring that because they wouldn't be able to get it maybe for 6 months.
No, but if it sounds like there's an existing attestation that's listed in the ordinance whereby they say that they have the punch list, essentially.
Not in the ordinance.
We have it as one of our conditions.
It's not enforced.
But you use the term existing.
I'm sorry, the existing proposed draft, yeah. I guess I'm wondering, like, is there a way that we can, because it sounds like the DRB's process has evolved quite a bit with the assistance of the planning commission to try to tighten it up. And I guess I'm just wondering if there isn't a way that we can more just combine the ordinance into the conditional use process. I'm looking for, like, what's the thing that we can't do through the conditional use process that the ordinance would allow us to do?
I don't think we have an answer to that because we don't have a specific checklist in front of us. And what I worry, like from looking back through these notes, is that there is a possibility that the process that we're using right now through the conditional use, through the DRB, is like rather subjective if we're not, like, if there isn't a prerequisite checklist that every person is subject to. I understand that there are going to be establishments that have been grandfathered in. That's not what I'm talking about. But going forward, it doesn't seem like we can add some things for some people and maybe not for others. So that's sort of where I'm at. It just seems like we may be redoubling efforts that the state is working on that we can address through our conditional use permitting. I think there's more that we need to think about here.
Did you?
No.
Charlie, we could make things, like, for instance, the short-term rental safety, health, and financial obligation form. We could make that a prerequisite on our list and have them submit it to us within a 30-day period.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Yeah, I mean.
I also just wanted clarification. So all of the short-term rentals that are currently exist in the conservation areas, Con 1 and Con 2, I think. Those are...
There are none in Con 1 and Con 2. You can't have them.
They're prohibited, but they exist. So...
Well, let's just be clear. I mean, like, zoning is complaint driven. There's any number of things from fences to junk cars to you name it happening in town that's zoning violations in every district. So,
yes.
But yeah, the answer is yes. There are probably rentals out there that we're not aware of which are not operating per zoning.
Yeah. Is that, I guess that's a zoning, like when the bylaws are rewritten. To me, that feels a little...
There's the zoning, then there's the question of enforcement.
Yeah.
Leanne?
Couldn't there be a requirement for proof of insurance? Something to look at? I mean, we have to show our rabies shots for our dogs, so couldn't we take a look at something, or the zoning board, or whoever?
Okay, so I'm gonna, just in the interest of time and kind of where the conversation's going, I'm gonna propose something to the board. I'm gonna propose that the board not act on this ordinance tonight. And that we essentially direct the DRB and the Planning Commission to develop a formal checklist for conditional use approval. Sounds like that's been in the works, but I don't think we've seen one yet. And that sounds like a gap that we're trying to wrestle with here, is again, what doesn't line up and what can be in there that's not right now. So I would direct the DRB and the PC to kind of work on that together and bring that back as a process that we can look at through conditional use review. If through that there is something that is a glaring hole, I think then we can pick up the ordinance discussion again, but I don't know, from the discussion tonight, it sounds like the more we talk about it, the more there's things that, well, we could do that through conditional use review, we just don't. So I would direct the DRB and the PC to work that up, and I would also tell the Planning Commission that if they need resources, whether it's a AirDNA subscription or whatever, to get more information, we can certainly work with that. If it's a de minimis cost, we can approve it. If it's something that the Planning Commission needs more money for, we can put that into the budget, but we can give the Planning Commission the tools that they need to get the information to which they can act on. But that also sounds like a gap that we're working with here, is we don't have the information that we really need at this point. Anything else from board members? Any other comments or suggestions?
I want to hear where the state is going with the S73 before we redouble efforts, especially if they're going to say that things need to be enforced. Then I'd like to hear what their enforcement processes are going to be or not be, so that we're not taking on a financial burden that maybe they should be taking on.
Okay. Anything else from the board before I kick it back for any final comments from? Okay. Final comments here, Darren. I saw your hand.
I can answer your question. I'm on the board of the Vermont Lodging Association. The governor has been very clear he will veto anything, so you're not going to get any help in the state.
I disagree. His vetoes can be overridden, Darren. That's
He can't. They can be, but he doesn't have votes.
No. He has
I can only tell you what the VLA has told me. He doesn't have the votes. They don't have the votes to override.
Okay, any final comments? And I do want to wrap this up really quickly. So
Okay.
Joe, very quickly.
I see here in a long pattern that I've seen, and I've lived in Montgomery a long time, that is an unwillingness to exercise some enforcement. Okay, we're avoiding the enforcement of having some kind of, not only just bylaws and the Development Review Board, they're complaining, but there's no teeth, you know. And we've had this ever since I've lived here, and it has a very positive element. It makes it seem more free and wild, and so to speak. But it's not free and wild. We have an equity industry now focused on real estate, and it's crawling up this state every single day. And we're further north. I write about it in the elderly branch as well. They're buying everything, and they're going to buy this down too. And I think we need some rigor in how we approach this, and I don't see it gathering here yet, and that distresses me.
Okay, well, I will just say that we do have a mechanism for enforcement, and it is zoning, and the penalties for zoning violations are pretty stiff.
Yeah.
So.
But it also puts the total on the zoning administrator being the enforcer.
It does, but we also have ordinances in the books that we've been unable to enforce due to lack of personnel capacity. If anybody wants to be a vacant building officer, that position has been vacant since we put the ordinance in place. So, you know, I guess I'd say I also don't want to pass enforcement things that we can't enforce due to capacity and personnel issues.
And one thing that I feel like the ordinance was addressing that I don't believe it's been addressed in conditional use, but I could be wrong, is having a local point person. Is that something that's ever been addressed with conditional use? And is that something conditional use could require, or is that out of the bounds?
It's required in every conditional use that we grant.
Okay.
It has to be posted.
It has to be within a 25-mile radius.
It sounds like we got what we need, we just need to put the teeth on
I
it.
mean, it also sounds like, you know, would it
That's
be
always
reasonable
been
to
a-
increase the fee, the zoning?
What I can say is that all the conditions that we put on, who is one.
Okay. Okay.
Get the show on the road.
So I think we're gonna wrap up this in the interest of time. We're just gonna wrap, I think.
I just don't want to keep, I don't want to come back, to tell you the truth. I just like, I feel like one issue after another, and I'm not trying to be dramatic in any respect, but as far as like trying to add on insurance or regulation every time, sometimes when you think how simple our bylaws are, there may have been more people, and you know, Joe can speak of it, a lot of people who've been here for decades on end, who have thought through this process a bit more, where you see the potential for issues with that in the future, with enforcement, with people actually being able to get insurance with some of our old houses. It isn't required, I don't think, for, I mean, Airbnb, do they require you to have insurance if you don't have a mortgage? If you don't, because it's difficult to get it sometimes with some of our houses. It isn't as easy as you think to require. It's definitely a good thing to have.
We should
and
bring
it's
it.
important,
Yeah.
But it's a personal liability, it's a private liability, or it's a business
Okay.
liability. It's not your liability.
All right. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I will just say, like, I can't say that nothing's ever gonna come back before the board, but I will just say that I think the board will make every effort that if issues come up, we make every effort to let folks know what's being discussed and an opportunity to weigh in, which is what we're doing tonight, so. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. People are welcome to hang out for the rest of the agenda. It's not a very long one. If you want, you can stay. If not, have a great evening. Just make sure if you haven't signed in yet that you do, just so we have a record for the minutes. Thank you.
Getting together with the DRB.
Yep.
We do that between now and your next meeting, and I'm free next meeting.
No, I don't see this, I don't see in the next 2 weeks with wrapping a bow on this in time for the town meeting timeline we're talking about. No. Yeah, I just say we're just gonna push this and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Because even with that other timeline, we're pushing, yeah. I don't wanna rush it. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, if folks want to have conversations, you guys are welcome to do it out in the hallway.
Girl, I got a question.
We
Yeah,
should not have.
Jimbo, go ahead.
How do you, you're not there, you're not there. You got never left in the.
Oh, I got you, Jimbo. Yep, I got you. Yeah. Yep, thanks. All right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Just say for the record, it's more fun being over here than over there.
What's in that cup?
Brad's jacket?
Brad, jacket. All right, so the rest of the agenda is pretty nothing burger. Public Works, Roads and Bridges, the personnel transitions, so that we acted on last time. I was gonna ask Mark for an update, but as far as I know, it's working out great with
It
Jane.
is working out great from what I heard. I stopped by there and talked to Dave Tanner.
Need like an official vote on that or anything?
No, we
No, you
don't need, I mean, we could have officially voted to just.
But you don't need to do
Nah,
that.
but we just don't act on it. So
Okay,
it's basically,
that's-
we're laying it on the table to use the Robert's Rules terms.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I realized. I was like, oh, I don't
Yeah.
quite, I mean, I know how it ended, but I don't know how it like officially ended.
No. Yeah, I
Okay.
think the board could have voted no on the ordinance and like, don't ever come back here with this.
Yeah, but
I
just
think we
tabling
just said
it.
we're gonna lay it on the table for now. It could get picked back up in the future.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt
No,
what you have.
no, it's all good.
Thank you, that was a great
We're like, wait a minute, did they need to?
Thank
vote?
you for all of your
Yeah,
work
thank you.
on that. Like,
Yeah.
I
We'll
hope that,
definitely coordinate with
I
the
hope that the
DRB
planning commission isn't walking away feeling like,
No, I think it's walking, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but, and we'll get in touch with the DRB.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
So yeah, the part-time hire, it's all working out, so the road crew is working out well. The Longley Bridge Road Project update, the selection committee met briefly last week for original planning to look at the next steps. We've got to review some material and then progress with the at-the-ready hire process for the consultant the engineer, overseer engineer. The irony is deep with that one. Buildings and grounds, 98 Main Street. I haven't heard anything back from the post office since early December. Granted, holidays, year end, whatever. My plan is this week, now that we're into a new year, to reach back out to them, see what we can do.
Maybe this is the year for the post.
Maybe this is our year.
Yeah, this might be our year.
Right? Water Commission update. So I did meet with the landowners for the easement paperwork last week. They have it and they're going to get it back to me. I don't have it in hand, but they wanted a little bit more time to review it, which is completely okay. I do expect to have that back from them or a response shortly. Visitors who are still online with us, Larry, I see your hand up. Anything for visitors?
Yeah, the first one is there was a Facebook post several weeks ago that actually developed almost a year ago, requesting the possible signage on some of the class 4 roads that's not open for the winter. I do recall one of the select board members saying they're going to try to get it on the agenda. I don't believe that happened. I just wondered where that went.
I think Mark was going to talk to Scott about that to see what we could do, but we didn't get any response back formally. But I can bring that back up with Mark and Scott to see if there's been any more thoughts on their end.
And the other thing is 98 Main Street. You know, the town could renovate that. It might make a nice SDR.
I think Larry just volunteered to be our short-term rental ordinance enforcer officer.
Excellent, and the vacant building enforcement?
And the vacant building officer.
Thanks, Larry.
Do I get a sash?
Yes? 2.
I was just going to offer you a 6-pack of Molson, but...
And a sash.
Anybody else online have any questions for visitors or things for visitors unrelated to topic? All right, if not, then the only thing is the town meeting 2023 planning. There's nothing really to discuss here. That was pegged mostly around if we had acted to pass the ordinance tonight, what the process would be for timelines for petitions. So for now, the budget committee is going to start meeting soon. I'm going to get that out to everybody this week after talking with Aaron. And so we'll move forward with that. We've got the calendar online and the Google Doc. If anyone's curious, we can review it. And that takes us through our agenda. So if there's nothing else in the room or on the Zoom.
So Charlie, you haven't set any dates for the budget?
No, I haven't.
Maybe I missed something.
No, we haven't set any dates. I checked in with Erin on her progress today on where she's at, and she's ready to rock and roll. So I'll get an email out tomorrow to everybody to set some dates.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thanks. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, Sue.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Good night.
Yes,
Good night.
I'll take that motion from Suzanne.
I'll second the motion.
Wow, I told Jesse I wouldn't be home till like almost 9 tonight.
Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, unanimous. Meeting is adjourned.